Good night.
I know she would have I
know. We need a quick introduction. Okay, everybody, just shake your hands. Get to it. Okay, right. Okay. Okay, good night, viewers. Welcome to Let Her Finish. I'm here again with Sabrina, number 1, Sabrina, number 2, myself, Anissa Aishida, and I would like to introduce our very first guest on Let Her Finish, Mr. Quentin Walcott. We're gonna call him Q tonight.
Yes.
He is an anti-violence activist and educator specializing in engaging men and boys in ending gender-based violence. He is also the co-executive director of Connect, which is headquartered in New York City, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing interpersonal violence and promoting gender justice.
Yes.
He was brought to St. Maarten here by Safe Haven to discuss domestic violence, toxic masculinity, and we have him here on the show, and we're going to, direct you some questions, pick your brain and get into a deep discussion about it, and because we feel strongly about St. Maarten and the impacts of domestic violence on St. Maarten. We just want to pick your brain. So I don't know who wants to start. Ishina?
Yeah, I would like to know where the passion for anti-violence came from. When was this born?
It's probably born when I was in undergrad. I was a student activist and community activist, so I was always someone that was kind of advocating for folks who were in positions of power, folks who were being harmed, or the underdog in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I went to your keynote address at the Culture Center, and we know you had a long week because all the organizations have been after you to, address them and talk about domestic violence and the link between domestic violence and toxic masculinity, and basically what's the link, where does it stem from, and yeah.
Yeah, I would just start off with like domestic violence is really about it's about power. Power and control, like all types of violence, but domestic violence in particular to relationships, intimate relationships. Sometimes it's called intimate partner violence, but it's really about power and control in a relationship, or gaining and maintaining power and control over someone else, and then using the different tactics of abuse to get that control, and that's anywhere from physical violence, or physical abuse, which everyone kind of knows, the hitting, that physical part of it, or sexual violence. But then there's also like psychological, mental, verbal, financial, all those different types and forms of abuse that kind of contribute to this idea of being in control in your relationship. And in particular of domestic violence, most of the cases that are reported are when men are abusing women and girls. So with that, we have to kind of look at domestic violence in a different way, not as a women's issue, but really as something that women have to deal with as a result of typically male violence. So kind of framing it in a different way to make it really about making it a men's issue. And then when we think about what men, how men are socialized and the choices that we make, and the choices that are supported by certain privileges that we have as men, and also about society. If society treats women and girls differently from men and boys, that kind of contributes to this idea that men are more valuable than women and girls. So when there's a difference in terms of value, sometimes what happens is we kind of see women and girls as like property or objects, something that we own and that we can control. And if we own them and if we think it's ours, it's easy for us to abuse them. So we can do anything we want with them. So with that, this idea of not even getting so caught up in toxic masculinity, but masculinity. And a lot of times if you hear that, it's a jargony term. So don't get caught up so much in masculinity. So when you're doing your work, you're saying, oh, you're being very toxic or you're being hyper masculine right now. You want to kind of talk about the attitude that you're portraying and performing with. So, you know, masculinity is usually attributed to how manly you are, or manhood, or just kind of like just what being a man is, behavior as a man, and what type. So toxic masculinity is the type that's, if you look at it in a real simple term, my masculinity or how I perform at the cost of someone else. So that really like connects it to intimate partner violence and domestic violence, is that for me to perform a particular type of way at the cost of someone else is usually, you know, your girlfriend, your wife, your partner, whoever you're in a relationship with. And so in that power and control, so when you link it back to what it means to be a man and the gender roles that we play as men and women, you know, what contributes to that. So, and if I'm in a position, so when you think about what a man is and what a woman is, in a stereotypical sense, it's typically, you know, men are heads of the household, they're breadwinners, they're all of these different types of things, and that women are typically supporters of whatever men want to do and want to be. So with that kind of setup, it makes it easy for men to be abusive again. So with that setup, it says that men have certain privileges that women don't have just by being men and having male body parts. So we call that male privilege. And like in society, there's all types of privilege. There's racial privilege, there's gender privilege, there's class privilege, there's, you know, all these different type of things. Some people are in a position of power, some people are not. And how like domestic violence comes in, or whatever form of violence it may be, it's like gaining, retaining that power, because there's so many different things that afforded to the person who's winning or who's in control in that story, right? So that's kind of how it's kind of connected. And like toxic masculinity is really one type of masculinity. There's different types and different forms. I think that men in particular perform all throughout the day. I'll use myself as an example. I'm from New York City, and growing up in New York City, right now there's a lot of gentrification, and it's not as quote unquote dangerous as it, you know, appeared to be when I was growing up, like in Harlem and South Jamaica, Queens. So like me being at home, if it's safe at home, I don't have to put this real hyper toxic mask on. I could be closer to my true self. I can put a mask on that's not threatening to anybody else. I can be loving, I can be caring to my family and to people in my community. But if it's violent and it's danger in the home, I'm more apt to put on a more tough demeanor, and sometimes tough from a range from tough to toxic, right? Because I'm in this mode where it's either me or my family or someone else. So like you're in a battle, you're in a war zone type of thing. So yeah, so it's kind of like toxic is just the latest term. Like maybe a couple of years ago we were using hypermasculinity. An example of hypermasculinity would be, I don't know if you all watch wrestling, you know, like that guy who was on TV, I'm gonna kill him, I'm gonna do this, I'm slam. That was like a hyper masculine example of that.
So, you know, you describe it really well, and for us, we see that, you know, it shows up. One of the things I wanted to ask is, you know, it's not something that only concerns Sint Maarten. It's in the US, it's a global issue. So like, there probably is a select few cultures where the women weren't targeted basically, or are like this, but how did that come to be? Is there any thoughts on that? How come all over the world women are just, we had to go through this phase of...
Yeah, you know, I think there's been societies where there was more of a, you know, matriarchal rather than patriarchy, because that is the link of this global issue, is that it's about patriarchy. And that is another technical term, but essentially that it's really kind of like men on the highball, and men are the center, and everything kind of falls in line. And patriarchy is like a system that supports the idea that men are in control, that they are the leaders, they are the presidents, they are the, you know, they're just kind of the heads of
the face,
right? Exactly. So that's essentially what it comes from, and that
Because some people want to make you feel like, oh, but it's natural, it's nature, it's biological.
Right.
The reason why women have to be oppressed is because
and I think in certain culture it stems from a narrative that's been passed on for like decades and decades. It's in the way we tell our history. It's in the way that we,
religion.
We talk about religion or stuff like that. It's sort of this thing that's been passed on and it's so now deeply embedded in us that I think it's hard for us to realize what is something that, as you say, nature versus nurture.
And I want to right off of that, because we have in our society, we are faced, for example, Trump, let's say. This is a depiction of a man, and they're in society now, for our kids, for example, a lot of in the hip-hop culture and everything basically that we see too in growing up with the Barbie doll Ken, leading up to the rap culture, leading up to the like CEOs of companies. How do we start to because this is the reality of it. You see a lot of men in certain roles and portraying this masculinity that is sometimes not conducive to what we're trying to do, which is break down these stereotypical roles. So how then do we break it down and start to reshape what is the role of men and the role of women?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think it takes time, number one, right? So, like what we've done in St. Maarten, and I'm glad that you mentioned that it's a worldwide issue. It's not anything in particular to St. Maarten. It's all over the world, right? Because patriarchy is something that's real. And then it's not just patriarchy alone. It's misogyny, like this hatred towards women, and that we are socialized that way. You know, that if I'm socialized in a way that makes me more powerful than somebody else, that's problematic. So, and a lot of times where the struggle is, we want equal rights, right? And that's fine. But in the struggle to get equal rights, it can be very violent to do that, right? So we got to really kind of move to a culture of mutuality. So it doesn't matter who brings the money to the table. If I'm the breadwinner, so to speak, and I'm in a relationship with one of you or all four of you, right? But and you all are playing a role of caretaker, nurturer. That has to have the same value as his monetary value I'm bringing to the table. So if we kind of change things in that way, and then a lot of times we just yield the fact that I'm a male. I'm socialized to be a certain way just because I'm a male. So we yield into it. We don't question it. So I think when we start questioning it and asking those questions, why is it this way? And that's it's cultural as well and it's generational. That begins to kind of challenge that in a way, and we want to do it in a way that's not disrespectful to the culture and traditions, but we have to really kind of question what are these traditions and who benefits most from it. And most of the time, it's men that benefit from it. Like within domestic violence and toxic masculinity, it's about it's profitable in the sense it gives me a false sense of esteem, false sense of value, false sense of worth. And usually to get that, I have to lower my female counterparts to do that, so it's false. All you just have is two people with low self-esteem. So.
Well, coming back to the gender roles, because I've been pretty opinionated on gender roles. I'm a person that I'm very for the equality of genders, and I'm less focused on what gender you are as a human being, but who you are as a human being. So I just have a question as to how, because I know you have a couple of programs that talk to girls and women, stuff like that, and I would like to know like how you approach that, because I see gender roles as a thing where like it creates an imbalance. A society that strictly enforces gender roles, as much as I don't want to, put anyone down for a woman exactly for being the nurturer in the house or stuff like that, I feel like it still does create that imbalance. So how do you deal with that in your programs where you want to kind of strip away that woman like stereotype, but you still want them to be, I'm a woman, I'm strong and I'm a woman, but take away the stereotypes, what it involves being a woman.
Right, it's an interesting question, and like like I did, I think the keynote, just asked this open-ended question like, what is a man, what is a woman?
Yeah.
And that was a very mixed crowd. We had a lot of young people, you know, and the older folks, and it's always the same answers.
Yes.
Like I could ask a bunch of 8-year-olds, and they come up with the same things about what is a man, what is a woman. Very stereotypical, even though this is 2018, and we, you know, in those we call like the gender binary, very limiting. You know what I mean? It's just only, it's either black or white. It's male, female. It's top or bottom,
masculine, feminine.
Masculine, feminine. And but you know, these are like 8-year-olds, and they come up with the same thing. So why is it that they come up with that? And that's through media. That's through treating boys and girls differently at school, mom and dad's relationship and interactions at home. It's, you know, it's all over the place. So even if we have a household where we're empowering our young women in the same ways that we're empowering our young guys, it's that's just your household, but everything around it supports this other narrative, this other conversation. So we have to kind of just really kind of be critical in how we think, critical how we listen, and really kind of challenge in a different way. And then, you know, and just treat boys and girls as much as you possibly can the same. Right? Because it's not them deciding I want to be this way or that way. It's us as adults that kind of push this. We're socialized through words, and you know, that exercise that night was really about women are socialized with feminine words or qualities, men with masculine qualities. But if you really break it down, they're the same words.
They can interchange.
The synonyms, right? And, you know, I had one time doing workshops over the years, a man that said, you know, Mr. Q, men are nurturers. And he had to punch his fist in his hand to say it, because it's typically associated with moms and women. And then we say men are protectors and providers. It's the same thing as a nurturer, right? So how come we can't interchangeably say it? Because we're worried about this word seeming feminine and this word seeming masculine.
So basically you're saying the approach then is basically home, but also in our educational system.
Right.
And just throughout the whole community, because you can't have just one initiative. One initiative. So do you have any initiatives that you work on in New York?
Oh, definitely, and I do it all over the world. I'm in Brazil, South Africa, and it's essentially the same principal issues. The location is different, the policies, you know, a lot of the cultural. Well, here, and then doing some stuff in hopefully in Trinidad and the Bahamas coming up soon. So, but yeah, you know, but what was the question again?
The initiatives.
All right, so initiatives, yes. Yeah, you know, and many things need to be done, right? So we're working in schools. We do single gender groups in schools. We do co-ed groups in schools, from middle school, high school, college campuses. And the other part of it is that, you know, young people can change. They don't have a lot of power to change their conditions individually or in their homes. So you got to work with adults. So like if I'm working in a school in New York City, I'm working with the students directly. I'm working with the teachers. I'm working with the guidance counselors. I'm working with the administration. I'm working with the security guards, right? Because all of those locations play a role in setting the path for the status quo or something that can challenge. And then really looking at systems change. So the systems change is very, very important, about policy and then protocols, and work in faith communities, you know, because that's where a lot of the ideas and notions of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. Because what the other part of that conversation is really, what is a man of God, what is a woman of God, and all those things kind of support the idea of that general status quo.
Yeah, I think that is an important, because what I'm hearing is that it's a responsibility of every individual in the community and organization. And, you know, where that is concerned, I you know, people might not like my opinion on this, but I think the church plays a huge role where that is concerned. You know, perpetuating this, man is this, woman is this, and you have to be submissive, and you know, and then how men have been socialized, they then start to see women as property, and then we are surprised when a woman wants to do something, you know, she's killed, or you know, because you know, it's almost like they feel when a woman does something contrary to what they want to have happen, that is a direct reflection on their manhood or on themselves. So then it's understandably why they then react, but that doesn't make it right, but we have socialized them that way. And so, you know, that is a part I would like you to just expound a little bit on, you know, the role that, you know, religion or church, and not to say there's something negative, but they also have to take up their responsibility for what they preach on the pew.
And I hate to add to that unpopular opinion, but also the idea that they give women that when you're in a relationship, it is something that's forever, and it's like you need to keep it within the relationship. It's something between you and that person, so you feel unable to
be open,
reach for support somewhere else, or to reach, and you know,
because it's between you guys.
Yeah.
And, you know, why we touch on it is because, I mean, it has such an influence in society, and then, you know, when like you said, then you feel like you cannot come out. But if we ask the government to take up their responsibility, we ask parents, what are you doing? And I feel like certain organizations get a pass just because.
Right.
So, you know, if you could just speak on that in your
I keep it, I guess.
Y'all trying to get me in trouble. But yeah, but you're absolutely correct. You know, and it's not just the church, it's the mosque, it's the synagogue.
Right.
And I just did, you know, right before this episode or this show, I was at a church in the neighborhood and talked to them about, you know, it's not necessarily religion itself. You know, there's a lot of there's patriarchy in religion, right? All types, every book of faith. But part of it is the interpretation of that book of faith to justify or rationalize behavior, particularly violence against women and girls, and violence against young people, you know, all these different types of things. So yeah, you know, like a real quick story. When my organization first started Connect about 15 years ago, we were tasked with looking at how prevention would look in New York City, not just crisis intervention, which is needed, but like how do we even interrupt that? So we spoke to the community. At that time, we started in Brooklyn, Flatbush East, Flatbush, and Crown Heights. You know, there's a hotbed of all types of activity, from highest incidence of domestic violence, HIV and AIDS for young girls, police brutality like you wouldn't believe, to the same levels as today, unfortunately. And then a lot of men coming back from incarceration. So all these things combined was that made us see that domestic violence is not just a standalone issue, it's an intersectional issue. So to deal with one, you have to deal with all. So that's how we approach, and using community organizing to do that, to connect domestic violence to whatever social justice or health issue you're dealing with. So we asked the people, what do you think about domestic violence and not that part of Brooklyn? Folks from St. Maarten, Trinidad, Barbados, all over the world, because New York is very international, block to block, different culture, different language, different accent. So folks did not believe in going to systems, police and courts, because of fear of deportation and also just not having trust with police. They said they wanted to go to their faith institution. Right? So, and that's the church, mosque, synagogue, particularly in that part of Brooklyn, very diverse faith beliefs. But the issue was, like a survivor would go to church and say, so-and-so's abusing me, and then the pastor, faith leader would say, what did you do for him to do that to you? Go home, pray harder, this is your sacrifice, this is your burden, all these different things. And part of it was this idea that you are not to complain, that you're at fault, or splitting the responsibility, or like not believing you because, for instance, like in one case, the woman disclosed to the pastor, the husband was the deacon, and the deacon was bringing money into the church. So what ended up happening is that she had to leave the faith community, and then he wasn't held accountable. So our thing was that churches have a religious mandate where they can do both. Hold the person doing the harm accountable and keep the persons being harmed safe. But then we said, if that's where people wanted to go, because they felt that was their sanctuary, no matter what their country of origin was, faith plays that role. Sometimes you're leaving it because of, different reasons, but they said they wanted to go there real quickly And then we said partner with a community-based organization that's an expert in this, so we can do both. And so that's where we kind of came.
And try to deal with that. And, and that was actually one of my questions. How do we try and shift the perception of blame from the victim to the abuser? Because that, like you said, that's usually the first question. Oh, what did you do?
Right. Yeah. So that's where our approach of community organizing comes in. The community has to play that role. So they have to be able to kind of intervene safely. This whole idea of like looking at not throwing anyone away, right? So communities historically have done that, where you've either addressed domestic violence or sexual violence, kept it quiet, or developed some way of dealing with it. So that's what we want. We want to take the onus responsibility off the victim survivor, hold the men accountable, help them get the change they need to change the mindset, which can change their behavior, help them kind of make different decisions. Because typically survivors don't disclose. They don't call the police in that part of Brooklyn for many clear reasons why not. Because they're like, I don't want to call police on the person's doing harm on me because they may get harmed. You have to live with that. In your faith community, we started post 9/11. Muslim communities were being surveilled anyway. And then I'm going to complain about domestic violence and bring that shame to my community and more surveillance. So just really being practical about it, using like community organizing techniques to link domestic violence to whatever you're dealing with, because it may be the cause of that. Young children who witness domestic violence in the home, in New York, in the States at least, is about 65–70% who witness end up involved with gun and gang violence. So there's a connection and a continuum of violence. So DV prevention is gun and gang violence prevention. Gun and gang violence prevention is DV prevention. So we're really being creative around how we approach it and look at it, so that we can transform the community. So it becomes a community, no longer a woman's issue, it's a men's issue, and now a community issue, because they can hold all of that.
You mentioned that, aside from holding the abuser and male accountable, rehabilitation is always a part of that process. How do you approach that when, for instance, you address things like toxic masculinity? Because it's very, I guess when males hear it, they're a little bit like, put
defensive.
into offense, defensive.
Right.
So how do you approach that in a terms where we're saying, the way that you're raised is wrong and you need to change your mindset?
But
because it's difficult.
We're not doing it that way. I'm saying,
hopefully not.
No, because it would not even happen, right? So just like historically with like domestic violence survivors or victims, like this idea of victim, right? I'm a victim. I'm here for the victims group, so that becomes my identity, right? So we lift that, and we call them survivors as a political thing, or just like with men. I used to run groups and round tables and things, say this is the male batterers group. Nobody can. Right? I'm not going to say my name is Q, I'm a batterer, I'm here for the batterers group, the floor is on. Right? So just really being really creative around, and not fooling people about what it is. It's about, and I said this earlier, like people get caught up in domestic violence. The term domestic is problematic because it means at home, it means private, it means between typically a man and a woman, so all of these different things. So it's really about, this is an issue of human beings, about relationships, about healthy sides.
And just strip away the negative connotation that's linked to it.
So toxic masculinity is just it's really a scientific term that really comes from the United Nations and things like that. So again, when we talk about unhealthy manhood or manhood, or just manhood, period. And toxic masculinity is just one of the range of masculinities, right? There's hyper, there's middle, there's to the feminine, to the toxic, right? People get caught up in those words, but don't get caught up in that. So when I'm working with youth, I'm not saying, you guys, what do you think of type of masculinity? But they want to know, like, what is a man? I don't even know what a man is. And so we break that down. Like, we talk about notions, like what is your notion of manhood? What is your notion of fatherhood, womanhood?
And where it stems from in their mind to try to bring them back to the root of what they're thinking.
Right. So and you got to be creative outside the box, because what has worked, what people have done in the past does not work. So we're having this conversation today.
Exactly.
So we got to really think outside the box.
One of the things you brought to the forefront, which I thought was cool, was when you identified or said that guys wear different masks. So, you know, when you're around your boys, and I think I saw it in one of your videos also, when you're around your boys, you probably don't want to go and you know, harass a girl. But you're going to do it anyway because of however. And if you're, for example, you're in front of your male friends and your girlfriend says something that the other guys might perceive to be something that you have to show yourself. So, you know, there was this thing of this degree of masculinity where, you know, it's about re-socializing them to understand that there's different ways to do it, and there's nothing wrong with being more softer and not so hard. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Right. You know, it's during the course of a day, I put, even myself to this day and age, I'm real comfortable in my skin. I put on different masks depending on where I'm at. Like if police around me, my boys around me, I'm in a tough situation, I'm on the train, I'm in the workplace. We put on different masks, right? So, and that's about negotiation, that's about defense, that's about all these different types of things. And I've been in those situations where I had to perform, and my mother raised me, my boy as a single mom. My brother as a single mom. So she raised us in a particular type of way to be more towards the hyper toxic masculine, so we could get home at the end of the day. So we had to navigate amongst other guys and men and police and gangs and all these other things. She said, get your butt home. So we had to put these masks on, but at home we took it off, and she was in charge. You know what I mean?
So in that case, the environment that you're in plays a huge role.
Absolutely.
So I've seen more as a holistic approach, because how can, if you're telling them, you know, you need to be a little more, not feminine, but you know, break down this barrier and whatnot, but they go out there in this environment that is just
not safe.
You're not safe. And you're not allowed, like almost like you're not allowed to.
So look at that, right? So sometimes you're not allowed to, and then sometimes I'm going to put that mask on, that toxic mask, as a self-defense. So we always kind of look at it as this negative, crazy thing, because we're thinking people are that 24/7, and no one is. I work with very abusive men to the least abusive. None of them are all that all day. So we got to kind of put that in perspective, because I could be abusive in my relationship, but terrible with my kids. I could be a good, terrible with my kids and good with my relationship, or with friends, whatever it is. People are not stagnant in one thing all the time. So, but in knowing that, there's an entry point into how can I work with this person. Have some understanding, and understanding is not forgiving, but understanding, and then I can kind of figure out ways. And last thing I want to say is that, we look at we're socialized to look at accountability and consequences through a criminal legal system. And that does not work for everyone, right? So if you're a person of color, a man of color, you're responding to a different way. A woman of color, or just a woman, responding to it in a different way. If you're poor, responding to it in a different way. So a lot of people are not looking at, the traditional legal systems, although the struggle is to make sure that violence against women is a crime. So we want to make sure that there's some accountability in the same ways, but at the same time, that system doesn't work for everyone. Particularly that person in Brooklyn who is undocumented, who is a person of color, who is not educated, who is believes in a particular type of faith. All of these challenges they face, and so that system does not work. So we're looking at the questions you asked before, what do you do? We're looking at restorative justice, transformative justice as options to the typical criminal legal system.
As a holistic approach. I really liked how you ended the session on Thursday with promoting and especially for the younger generation, but even too for us as young women and young men, even older guys, to ask the question why. Why are we socialized to think a certain way? And I don't know if you guys have any last words, but I just wanted to say that I thought that was very powerful, because sometimes we go through life and we oftentimes don't ask why. And I think it was empowering for especially the younger generation to hear that, so that they can sort of think deeper than just, okay, this is how I am and that's it. This is how I'm supposed to treat a woman and that's it. And this is how I'm supposed to be as a man and that's it. So I thought that was a powerful, to leave off the keynote with. So,
Yes.
but I want to thank you very much for coming on our show. I was like messing. I was like, Quentin, can you please?
This was a labor of love.
Yes,
'Cause,
yes.
Otherwise, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't do it. But
Yeah. and-
You have a good message to share, so I think we're super glad that we're able to have you on here. And as Anissa said, pick your brain, because you really showed that, like, how integrated the whole topic is. And I think you shed light on, you know, that this is not an isolated thing, but a thing that covers many topics.
And
so.
not only man or
woman,
man,
a community, a whole
Whole
system.
community responsibility.
I love your idea of it's not man versus woman, but it's human beings learning how to
Right.
have healthy relationships, and I love that idea of that.
Exactly. So we want to thank you once again.
my pleasure.
Tune in to Let Her Finish. This is what the 6th episode. And
Congratulations.
like,
Wow.
share, comment, subscribe, comment, tell us what you think. Follow Quentin Walcott, follow his message and his initiatives. And yeah, see you next time.